The first time my granddaughter looked straight through me at Thanksgiving, I told myself she was just tired from the drive. The second time, 4 years later, standing in a hospital hallway in Charleston, I finally understood it wasn't tiredness at all. I'm going to tell you what happened on the day the county gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award for 38 years of coaching high school football, and what happened 6 hours later when my phone lit up on a gas station counter in Beaufort, South Carolina, and didn't stop buzzing for the better part of a night. Welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome if this is your first time finding us. Drop a comment and tell me what part of the country you're watching from tonight. And if these kinds of stories mean something to you, go ahead and hit subscribe before I get going, because you're going to want to see how this one lands. I want to start with Micah, because none of what happened makes any sense without him first. Micah is my great-nephew, my late brother Thomas's grandson, though by the time everything settled, I'd stopped thinking of him in terms of the family chart and just thought of him as mine. Thomas died of a stroke when Micah was 19, sitting behind the counter of the hardware store he'd run on Coosaw Street for almost 30 years. The same store our father had opened back when the road out front was still dirt. Micah was working the register that afternoon. He called the ambulance himself, then he called me, because his own father had been out of the picture since Micah was 7, and there wasn't anyone else steady enough to call. I drove over that same night and found him sitting on the curb outside the store with the open sign still lit in the window, because he hadn't been able to make himself go back inside and turn it off. I sat down next to him on that curb and didn't say much of anything, because there wasn't much worth saying, and we just watched the traffic light on the corner change red, green, for longer than I could tell you. Micah kept that store running after that. 19 years old, no diploma yet, and he kept it running on stubbornness and 18-hour days, and a head for numbers nobody had ever bothered to notice he had. I'd stop in on Saturday mornings sometimes, and he'd already be there, sweeping the same 3 feet of floor in front of the register like the broom was the only thing keeping his hands from shaking. He never once asked me for money. When the walk-in cooler in the back died on him 2 summers ago, he fixed the compressor himself with a manual he'd found online, rather than take out a loan he wasn't sure he could pay back. He was drowning, quietly, and too proud, or maybe too scared, to say so out loud to anybody, including me. My name is Walter Pruitt. I'm 69 years old. I spent 38 years coaching football and teaching driver's ed at Battery Creek High School, the kind of job where you make a school teacher's salary and tell yourself the real payment is watching a kid who couldn't run a 40 in under 6 seconds turn into a young man who can look you in the eye and shake your hand like he means it. I coached 3 state semifinal teams. I missed my daughter's college graduation because it fell during two-a-days. The same week our starting quarterback tore his ACL, and I couldn't leave the team, and I told myself for years that missing it was just part of the job, the cost of building something bigger than one Saturday afternoon. I never once stopped to ask my daughter whether she wanted a father who built something bigger, or whether she just wanted her father sitting in the 3rd row when they called her name. That's my honest fault in all of this, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise. I built a program and called it Purpose, and I never once turned around to check whether my own family was still standing behind me while I did it. My wife Loretta passed 9 years ago, pancreatic cancer, fast, the kind that doesn't give you time to prepare the way people think it does. She used to say our daughter Denise had my stubbornness and her own mother's habit of keeping score, and that those 2 traits together in one person were about the most dangerous combination you could hand down to a child. I laughed when she first said it, years ago, sitting on the back porch with sweet tea sweating on the railing between us. I don't laugh at it anymore. I think about it most nights now. On the 2nd Tuesday in April, the athletic director from the school district called to tell me the county had voted to name the football field after me, and that they wanted to do it properly, a real ceremony, under the Friday night lights. The county commissioner speaking, the local news station, sending a crew down from Columbia, because 38 years of coaching in one town doesn't happen much anymore, and somebody in the district office thought that was worth putting on television. I called Denise before I called my own sister. I remember exactly what I said. They're naming the field after me, baby. 38 years. I want you and the kids there. There was a silence on the line that had a shape to it. I didn't like one bit. "Dad, we already put down the deposit on the lake house. Kyle's been wanting this trip for months. It's the only week that worked with his job." I told her the ceremony date was fixed by the school calendar, that I couldn't ask a county commissioner to move a Friday night for a family vacation. She said, and I'm quoting this back to you word for word because I have turned it over in my head more times than I could count since, "It's just a field with your name on a sign, Dad. You've had that field for 38 years already. It's not like this is the last time we'll see you." Her husband Kyle got on the phone after that, not to smooth anything over, but to ask if I could try to understand things from their side, with the kids' school schedules and the money already spent on the deposit. I told him I understood it just fine. I hung up first. That is not a thing that happens between a father and his daughter, the father ending the call first. But I did it because I did not trust my own voice to hold steady if I kept listening. I sat in my kitchen on Rebo Road for a long while after that phone call. The ceiling fan ticked the way it's ticked for 20 years and never gotten fixed. A dog 3 yards over barked at something and then gave up on it. I did not cry. I just sat there running the numbers in my head. How many missed dinners and missed recitals and missed ordinary Tuesday nights it must have taken to raise a daughter who could call a lifetime achievement ceremony nothing more than a field with a sign on it, without so much as a catch in her voice when she said it. That's when I thought about calling Micah. I called him on a Sunday evening. He was still at the store, doing inventory alone under the fluorescent lights. I could hear the little bell over the door jingle behind him when a customer let themselves out. When I asked him to come stand beside me at the ceremony as my guest, he went quiet on the line for a second, and then he said, "Uncle Walt, I would be honored to be there. I mean that. Not I guess I could make it work. Not sure, I'll see." He said honored, a 23-year-old kid running himself ragged trying to keep his grandfather's store lit up every morning, and he still had room in him for a word like that. If you have ever had somebody in your life who showed up for no reason except that showing up is simply who they are, go on and hit that like button right now, because this story is about to need you rooting for a young man like that. The night of the ceremony, Micah showed up in a sport coat that fit him wrong in the shoulders. The kind you find on a clearance rack when you've got $200 saved for a walk-in cooler repair and none left over for tailoring. He didn't seem to care one bit. He stood next to me on that field with his hands clasped in front of him like he was standing at a graveside, and every so often he'd lean toward me and ask, quiet and genuinely curious, who this or that person on the sideline was, genuinely proud just to be standing there next to me under those lights. The bleachers were maybe 2/3 full, families and old players and a good part of the town. A camera crew from the Columbia station had set up near the 50-yard line, a red light blinking steady on top of the camera. I gave a short talk about the boys I'd coached across nearly 4 decades, about the 2003 team that went to the semifinals with 6 sophomores starting because half our roster had the flu, about the plain value of showing up to practice on a 100-degree afternoon in August when nobody's filming you and nobody's clapping. I looked out at the 2 empty folding chairs in the front row that had Denise's and Kyle's names taped to the backs of them, and then I looked over at Micah, and I kept right on talking. Then Superintendent Vernal Hayes came up to the podium with a folder tucked under her arm, and something in the way she cleared her throat told me there was more coming that nobody had told me about ahead of time. "Coach Pruitt has given this county 38 years, she said. So the district decided this year we weren't just going to put his name on a sign and call it done. We asked Coach who he would choose to stand beside him tonight, who represents what those 38 years were actually for. She named my great-nephew, Micah Pruitt. I had not been told what that meant going in. I found out along with everybody else in those bleachers, live on the local news feed. Micah runs Pruitt's Hardware, over on Coosaw Street. Hayes said, a store that's been fighting to stay open for 4 years since his grandfather passed. Tonight, in Coach Pruitt's honor, the Beaufort County Business Alliance is awarding Micah a $240,000 restoration grant to modernize that store and keep it in this community for another generation. The bleachers went quiet, and then they didn't. Micah's hands were shaking against the podium rail. He looked over at me like he needed my say-so, before he'd let himself believe any of it was real, and I just nodded, because I couldn't find my own words either just then. The tears running down that boy's face weren't the kind people put on for a camera. I've watched enough of those in my life to know the difference. This was a young man who'd called an ambulance for his own grandfather from behind a hardware store counter, finally hearing somebody tell him that everything he'd sacrificed had actually meant something to somebody besides himself. We didn't stick around for the reception afterward. Micah and I ended up an hour later at a Waffle House off Robert Small's Parkway, the kind of place where the coffee never runs dry and the hash browns come the way you order them every single time. We ordered pie because neither one of us wanted a full meal. He kept saying, "I can't wrap my head around it," over and over, not because the dollar figure confused him, but because being chosen, plainly and publicly, was the part he couldn't process. My phone sat face down on the table between us. Around 9:15, it buzzed. I flipped it over without thinking much of it, and saw 14 missed calls, every one of them from Denise. I didn't call her back right away. I wasn't ready yet. By 10 o'clock, it had climbed to 31. Micah noticed my face change and asked if everything was all right. I told him it would be. I wasn't lying to him, but I wasn't sure of it myself either. Not yet. By 10:30, the count sat at 42, and texts had started stacking up underneath the calls, one right after another, fast. The kind of typing where you can feel somebody's temper coming through the screen before you've even opened the message. I finally read through them around 11. Denise's first text said, "Dad, what did you just do?" The next one, 2 minutes behind it, "That grant money should have come to us eventually anyway. That was basically Micah's college fund you just handed away." Then Kyle, a minute after that, we saw it on the hotel lobby TV. "You need to call the school district right now and get this fixed." I sat in that Waffle House booth that smelled like burnt coffee and syrup, reading the words, "Get this fixed," like a choice I'd made in front of a few hundred people, and a television camera was some clerical error a person could undo with one phone call. By the time Micah and I left, close to midnight, the count sat at 96. I had not answered a single one. I want to be honest with you about something. I was not furious, and I'd always assumed I would be, if a night like that one ever came. I'd pictured it, off and on over the years, some version of myself, finally shouting into a phone everything I'd swallowed down for decades. That is not what happened. What actually settled into me, staring at that number climbing on the screen, was something quieter and a good deal colder, like a door easing shut on its own weight instead of getting slammed. I called Denise back the next morning at 7 sharp because I was not going to give her the chance to say later that I'd ducked her. She picked up before the first ring had even finished. "Dad, you have to call Superintendent Hayes. Tell her it was a mistake. That money was supposed to come to us one way or another eventually, and you just handed it to Micah on the local news for the whole county to see." "It's not a mistake, Denise," I told her, as calm as I could hold my voice. "I hadn't punished anybody," I said. "I had simply been asked one question by the people running that ceremony, and I'd answered it honestly. Who represents what those 38 years were for? Nobody had made her put a deposit down on that lake house over her own father's ceremony. Nobody had told Kyle to call a night honoring me a field with a sign on it. They'd made their choice, and Micah had made a different one. And the distance between those two choices turned out to be the whole answer, laid out plain as day. So that's it then? You're picking him over your own daughter? I'm not picking him over you, Denise. I'm choosing the one who showed up. You chose not to be one of the people standing in that field." She hung up on me that time. I let her. 3 weeks after that, my attorney, a woman named Sandra Kwiatkowski, who had handled Loretta's estate and mine both for going on 12 years now, called to ask whether I wanted to revisit my will in light of everything that had happened. Truth is, I'd already been sitting with that question on my own for a while by then. Denise had never once gone without anything she needed from me growing up. Loretta and I had paid her tuition outright, covered her whole wedding, co-signed the loan on her and Kyle's first house. Micah had never asked me for one single thing in his entire life, and he'd lost his own grandfather behind a cash register at 19 years old, with nobody else steady enough in his corner to call. I did not rewrite the whole will out of spite, and I want that said plainly, because spite was never what was driving any of this. What I did was move the fishing cabin out on Ladies Island, the one Loretta and I bought the same year Denise was born, the one Denise hadn't set foot in for going on 7 years now, into a trust, naming Micah as caretaker, with the condition written in plain language that it stay in the family for holidays and gatherings, for whoever in the family wanted to make use of it. Not locked away from Denise, just no longer hers alone to inherit and sell off, which I'd since learned from a family friend had been exactly her plan for it all along. Denise found out about the cabin from Sandra's office, not from me, 5 months after the ceremony. She called me once. I let it go to voicemail, and later that night, when I finally listened to it, her voice wasn't sharp the way it had been before. It came out smaller. She said she didn't understand how things had gotten to this particular point between the two of us. If I'm being honest with you, that was maybe the first true thing she'd said to me in a good long while. I didn't call her back that night either. I sat out on my carport with a cup of coffee going cold on the arm of the chair, the same way Micah's coffee always goes cold on that workbench of his, and I thought about how strange it is that the people who ask you for the least in this life are so often the very ones who hand you back the most. Micah's store reopened that October under a new sign out front, Pruitt and Grandson Hardware, his idea, not mine, a stubborn little tribute to a grandfather who never got to see the place fixed up the way it deserved. He hung an old photograph of Thomas by the register, not because I asked him to, but because he told me the whole story didn't make sense to him, without both of them written into it somehow. I stop by most Saturday mornings even now. He still forgets his coffee sitting on that same counter. Some things don't change, and at this point in my life, I've come to be grateful for the ones that don't. Denise and I talk sometimes now, not often, and never easily. I don't know if the two of us will ever get back to whatever it was we used to be, and I've stopped waiting around for some single moment that fixes all of it at once, because at 69 years old, I don't believe that particular moment exists for most families. What I've got instead is quieter than any reconciliation would have been. I know exactly who shows up for me these days. I don't have to guess at it anymore, wondering who'll be there and who won't, and there's a strange kind of peace that comes with that, even on the nights it still aches some. If this story meant anything at all to you tonight, I want to ask you to do one thing before you close this out. Think hard about who actually shows up for you in this life, not who's supposed to, not who you keep hoping might someday, but who genuinely does, every single time, without you having to ask twice. Go on and tell that person what they mean to you. Don't you dare wait around for a field, a sign, and a camera crew to say it out loud the way I had to. And if you've got your own Micah in your life, or your own Denise, I would be glad to hear about it down in the comments. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If you're new here, go on and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.